naming procedures for new schools to order. Frank, have the floor. Who are we doing? Who's first?
You go to me.
You. Go ahead, Dr. Shanoff. You're not listed on here, so. You're not listed on my agenda.
Should have been.
That's known as a Kruppenbacher typo.
I've got Mr. Kellen and Mr. Kruppenbacher listed as first.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, everybody. Today's workshop is actually a long time coming. The board has had a lot of discussion around our current interlocal agreement and our need to really kind of triangulate the massive growth that's occurring within the school district and the community, and between developers and the county and the municipalities and the school district, finding some alignment in how to address that rapid growth, so then we can ensure that we're able to be responsive in getting our sites up and running to serve the students that will be needed in the future. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Callan. The second half of this workshop will be Mr. Boyd. When we went through school naming previously, there was a request from the board to possibly bring this back for discussion at workshop to see whether or not there were any sort of naming policies that would need to be adjusted. And so we were going to bring that back at this meeting as well. Obviously, the real estate portion of this meeting we have canceled. We've already done that update recently. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Callan. Welcome back, sir.
Good to see you, Mr. Superintendent.
It is always a joy in Osceola County when you grace us with your presence. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Madam Chair and Board Member Osceola. So concurrency. Concurrency is a concept involved in Florida law real quick back in 1985, passed the Growth Management Act. And for the first 20 years, it dealt primarily with transportation. Because water and sewer, nothing got built with water and sewer, so really that was kind of not a big issue. Transportation was. And then in 2005, they added schools. It was optional before that. Added actually back in the 1990s, but it was optional until 2005. The concept is that, real simple, that land use regulation is designed to meet the demands upon the school capacity by new residential development. It's achieved. Concurrency happens when there is adequate school facilities available to accommodate increases in student enrollment resulting from new development. That's the easy part. The hard part is how to do it, especially in a rapidly growing district or a district that isn't rapidly growing. And I'll get into that later. So there's some state authority in Chapter 163, also in the thousands, a couple other places too as well. So the brief history is on slide 6. Is really just the interlocal agreement the school district has with Osceola County, City of Kissimmee, and St. Cloud. Polk County has an interlocal agreement with the 12 or 15 cities in Polk County. Brevard County has an interlocal agreement with the 12 cities of Brevard County. Orange County has one as well. So that's become the method of choice required by state law, but everyone has a local agreement. It requires a consensus be developed between the government, local government agencies, and the school boards. It also requires a buy-in by the development community, as you know. And so there's sometimes competing interests with concurrency that you find is that local governments don't want to totally turn off the development community, but realizing that you have to have schools for the byproduct of development, the new residents. And so it becomes a kind of one of those kind of a tango dance somewhat in some regards. But I want to talk about what our current agreement has and then what we go on from there. It was first adopted. You have the 2014 agreement. We've been through that. I want to talk about the terminology. Let's go to slide 8. And there's a lot of terminology with regard to this. I don't want to get too much in the weeds about this, but for instance, to implement a good concurrency system, you have to have a district 5-year plan. It has to be updated annually. You have a staff working group that has some terms. These are terms from your agreement that exist today. The staff working group with the district board, district staff with local governments working together early on, getting some demographic data, socio-demographic data, student generation data, growth rates, those kinds of things are macro in nature as to what the 5-year horizon will be. So that staff working group is a very important part of that agreement you currently have today. There's also a tentative plan. You come up with a tentative district educational facilities plan, also known as a facilities plan, adopted by this board. You have an educational plant survey required by state law that you do every year. There's site selection. As part of your planning department, they look at areas where you need schools based upon the demographic data you see above, based upon generation rates you actually see on site from the various schools. They also call them school types too, people. They call them elementary, middle, and upper. You have a site review committee that reviews applications. You have a consistency review committee that compares the local government's rules and regulations with yours. You have a level of service standard, LOS, which says how much square footage of school do you need per student? How much land area you need per school? So certain objective measures that you've developed over the years that exist today. And then you have these called concurrency service areas. And these are kind of like student zones throughout the county, areas that serve parts, not the whole county, but subparts. So then you see that you could have one area of the county, you could have 2/3 of the county be under capacity, you could have 1/3 of the county over capacity. And so the purpose of CSAs is to help analyze the county as it is in a different way. Like Polk County has 78 different CSAs. I don't know the exact number here in Osceola County, but I imagine it's quite a few. And so that's an important part of this process. The 5-year district educational facilities plan is kind of similar as the 5-year plan, but you'll see that initial DEFP a lot in the agreement as well as other documents. The capital improvements element is what the school board gives the county. And the county puts in a comp plan too as well. And that comes out of this agreement. And you have a public impacts application. That's what's under this agreement, what's submitted. And then you have school capacity availability determination letter, SCAD. And that's used by a lot of organizations called SCADs. Palm Beach County, for instance, stopped concurrency. They just rely on SCADs. Why? Because Palm Beach County is largely built out. Pinellas County got rid of concurrency. Why? Pinellas County is built out. So they've gone to different approaches on capacity determination, not concurrency. And what concurrency does talk about is you talk about demand, supply and demand, supply of kids, and demand for kids, and the supply of schools. Demand of kids and supply of schools. But you also talk about a true concurrency system is timing. Concurrency is really intention to be timing. What's happened involved in the current agreement you have and with Orange County agreement that exists, Orange County model, is the timing issue is not is there to some degree, but not predominantly there. I'll get to that briefly. The current method of expanding capacity proportion share agreement or mitigation agreement, as you see, and a term called maximize utilization. In the agreement, as well as state law, requires the district to maximize the utilization of each site for student population. So they don't want to have underpopulated school systems or school systems with differing levels of square footage and other facilities. Those are some of the terms we deal with. The current interlocal agreement is about a 45-page document. This is on page 10. The staff working group we talked about earlier is Article 2, very important part of the agreement, extremely important part of the agreement, and it's an ongoing effort by Rhonda's group to coordinate with local government to give you the best data as student generation. Article 3 is student population enrollment, that's again part of that. And you have sharing of information, Article 4. You have school's tentative plan, 5-year plan, financing window, feasibility requirement. A lot of things are packed into that part by the district. The district has to come with a tentative plan, 5-year facilities plan, feasibility studies, and other items in that part of that. And that's per the agreement as well as state law. Cities and counties provide the school district growth and development trends. And there's also some required data submittals on a quarterly basis and sometimes even monthly basis. Page 11, Article 5 is the school site selection, renovations, and site closures. This is where the school district review committee will look at new sites, look at closing sites, look at renovations. They'll inform the county and cities of the locations they're looking for. In the development process, so the developer comes forward with a piece of property to contract, the Osceola district looking for a school site out of that area, that land. There's also Article 5 on infrastructure for new sites. That's more of a city and government requiring them to provide infrastructures to new sites for you all. Article 7 is a plan review for new development. This is really starting to get into the meat of the agreement. This is where the called current development is. This is the MASH unit. This is where the operation happens and most of the conflicts occur. Establish a system that the school board has input on new development for comp plans and rezoning. This is 2 layers of review you have here. For comp plans and rezonings, you have 1 layer of review. This is Article 7. Superintendent or his designee participates in land use amendment and rezoning process. They also provide comments on new development student generation needs. That's Rhonda's group again. And they establish a consistency review, not concurrency review. This is the consistency review part. And they establish a concurrency review later for plats and site plans of new development. So here, there's 2 levels you have. If you have a large-scale comp plan or rezoning, you have to go through a second step, first a consistency review, give the district some time to generate student development expected, because most development can take 5 years to get on the ground and another 5 years to build out. So you need a 10-year window for the district to figure out what's going on. That's a consistency, the big picture. And you know, most subdivisions, as a lawyer representing developers, the perfect component is a 25 lot plat. They love 25 lot plats. Maybe 50, but not really more than 20. Not more than 50, and not less than 25, because that's the max. That is a perfect point for them to maximize their yield, their time, and limit their risk. And they like that. So what you find is that plat process and site plan is where really most of the concurrency occurs there, because at that point you have 3 years to build out, and you have another 3 years after that. So that's kind of what we have here. So the consistency review is Article 7, and that continues on to Article 8. You all review land use applications and comp plan rezonings for impacts, enrollment, generation. We talked about that. You provide written comments and with land use approvals. And this is where the mitigation agreements start. This is where they say we need a school site on large scale development. You got 3,000 acres, you got 1,800 acres or whatever. We need a school site. If there is no capacity at the consistency review stage, which means that the current district schools are at their maximum level of service, the applicant may choose to offer, or the district may consider voluntary mitigation to address that. That's the language from the agreement you currently have. I didn't draft your current agreement. I don't think anyone sitting at this table are part of the current agreement. So I gotta tell you what the current agreement says. It does parallel Orange County's agreement. It starts off there. Student impacts are limited to dedication of new sites, payment of monies, or other mitigation. So your student impacts are in the agreement limited. You're limited in the current agreement on page 12. On that 3rd bullet point, you are limited to dedication of new sites, payment of monies, or other mitigation plans consistent with adopted school board policy. So they kind of limit your discretion in that current agreement. Now, I hate the word dedication. I'm a lawyer. The way it's used sometimes, people think, oh, it's a conveyance. It used to be tended to be kind of a dedication of streets and sidewalks when you plat a property. That means you're going to take part of your property and give it to the government for streets and sidewalks to serve that development. Then it becomes, well, no, that's what it means donate. They give it. Get no money in exchange. It's a dedication, required dedication. Then you have donation. And some school districts' agreements don't have the word dedication, like Polk County uses the word donation. They would provide, donate. They don't use the word dedicate. They don't even have the word convey. So there's certain ways you can structure these agreements by words you choose. Payment of monies or other mitigation plans. One mitigation plan you see now in Palm Beach County, the reason why they got rid of concurrency was the growth of charter schools. You have a growth of charter schools that can be used to mitigate impacts of student generation. Every district is dealing with that. And then last bullet point, the local government may consider the consistency review and the approval or timing of the development project. I haven't seen too many timings of development projects since 1996. It's got really big timing development projects, limited development projects, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and limiting people before the first big blow up back in 1990-91. It saw a lot of timing restrictions on development, like South Chase, Hunters Creek, Meadowwoods, back in the day, back in the late 80s, when I was a young attorney doing expressway work through there, and had to review all the development projects, all the development agreements, and the DRIs, and the Question 31s, and all the phasing they had. Got away from phasing afterwards because phasing causes problems with people getting financing. So understand from the perspective of the developer, the more they're limited by time, the more they have an impact with their financier where they can buy the property. Time is money, an equal component of that. So that's kind of, you don't see much timing of development restrictions in my experience in Osceola County. Concurrency reviews, Article 9. Occurs at plat or site plan. In effect, a consistency review occurs again in rezoning and comp plan. That also is a form of restriction on development, providing school site for expansion. But here, at any property, whether or not it gets rezoned or whether or not it gets comp plan, if it goes for plat or site plan for residential use, it has to go through concurrency review. That's the trigger. The county or city shall not approve a plat or subdivision, this is from the language of the agreement, until school concurrency requirement has been satisfied. County and cities are required to maintain data for the approved residential development and share that with the school district on a quarterly basis. Transmit all plats and site plans to the school district, review and comment consistent with and prior to the local government's consideration of approval. So they can't just give it to you after they approved it. They must give it to you ahead of time so you have input on that process through a concurrence review. The language can be beefed up in that agreement a little bit better, I think. Continuing on page 14, the concurrent district shall prepare and update the 5-year DFP capital facilities plan during this process of concurrency review. The LOS for each concurrency service area shall be included in the upcoming 5-year plan. So a lot of data-driven plans that you have to do based upon your CSAs. And I don't know how to determine your CSAs, and that's for other people in your department professional to deal with that. So that's a detail that you delegate to your staff. Operate again all schools at maximum utilization. And it's cited twice or 3 times in this agreement, this maximum utilization. Review plat and site plans, maintain data on capacity of each elementary, middle, or high school in each CSA, and provide information to local governments, and they shall amend their CIE. That's their capital improvements element. Page 15, this is section 814 of the interlocal. This is when there's insufficient capacity. So this is part of a school with a CSA of a proposed development. It says the district and the developer shall develop a proportionate share agreement plan. And the number of students that exceed the LOS capacity is multiplied by the Florida State cost factors plus the share of land acquisition costs for school sites. This is language right from the agreement.
It says shall, the language says shall.
Shall prepare a contingency plan, yes. And what it doesn't tell you what happens if you don't do it. That's not in the agreement at all. And so that's been kind of the invisible hand that ties both parties together to work out a consensual agreement. I'm not advocating that either. I'm just saying that's what it seems to be working out. Land costs are not assessed if the district uses existing land for mitigation. That's right in the agreement, which to me is kind of an odd statement. If you're using an existing asset for a new item, you should get something of mitigation on that, but I'll get into that later. And then paragraphs 1 through 4 of A of 8 outline the mandatory provisions for any agreement and developer. That's online. So the rest of the detail there I think is well below the board level. Trend in Florida, again, that concludes my review of the concurrency agreement. But the trend in Florida is moving away from concurrency to capacity enhancement. Implied with concurrency is this. When it first came out in 85, is it a little bit...
And Mark said that you were going to put us to sleep.
Am I putting you to sleep?
No.
I'm sorry. I feel like Charlie Brown's teacher. Okay. Well, in '85, the idea was that pay your impact fee and all that, you still may not be able to develop if roads are over capacity. You pay your impact fee for this, you still may not go forward because there's no schools over there. That's true concurrency preventing people from doing something, the timing of it. The Orange County system, which I reviewed their agreement, and the current agreement you have doesn't provide for withholding the development permits by the city if there's no capacity. And I want to explain how it kind of works out. Back in '89, in order to prevent the harsh consequences of concurrency on transportation, the state came out with Rule 9J5 and then all of 9J13 or 23 or something like that, and by State Department of Community Affairs. And they said, well, if even though roads are overcrowded, you have a 5-year road program in every county. The state has a 5-year road program, and the county has a 5-year road program. The city has a 5-year road program. And in the state, in order to build any state road, you have to have that project be part of the MPO approval with the 5-year road program. So if you're in the last 3 years of your 5-year road program, which means you're likely to go forward, they're not going to pull it off, because they pull it off sometimes. You can be in year 3 or 4, or 4 or 5, and you think you're ready to go in 5 years. They'll pull it off, and then you'll miss 10 years, and they'll put it back on by a vote of the MPO. And the state shouldn't be building roads unless they go through that process. But they developed a concept. The last 3 years of the 5-year program, you can treat that capacity of that road as if it's already built. And this concept came into roads back in the late 80s. That concept is here as well with the agreement you have and across state law, is that if there is a public facility supply of school space that is non-built, but is going to be projected in the next 3 years of the 5-year program, then that 3 years that capacity can be added to the capacity of the existing concurrency school area. And that area can expand the capacity even though it's not built yet. But it has to be the last 3 years of the 5-year window. And that concept came from transportation, that's why it's here. Why people are moving away from concurrency to capacity enhancement is because very few, if any, jurisdictions will prevent development or delay it due to school capacity issues. So it's called what it is. It's what becomes a student capacity enhancement process. How you treat that, how you work the numbers are, it varies. Okay. We looked at Pinellas County. Pinellas County, again, is built out. They just dropped the whole concurrency thing. Palm Beach County calls it capacity enhancement because most of the county is built out and they see most of their challenges for redevelopment. Brevard County has more of a similar system that you have. Orange County has a very similar system, but Orange County is almost all built out on the west side. And that's now the northwest side of Popka that's going to go forward. And then they have the big political issue on the east side with the Tavistock, the Mormon property. That's a big political issue there. I'm on the charter review committee for the county right now, and that's a big political issue on the committee dealing with those issues. So the county, but Orange County is largely built out on space. So what I did look at was Polk County. And Polk County has an interesting agreement. Pretty simple, very direct. Has a couple concepts that no one else has. There's a few concepts that no one else has that may be of importance to you that we're looking at as staff. Frank's asked us to get together and look at it and first find out, it's good to see something written in paper. Oh, that sounds like a wonderful concept. But go talk and practice what's going on with it. Is it really working out? Or are they working around it? A lot of times things are done that don't work out and they just work around it. They keep the agreement for show purposes. But they have a couple of provisions over there in Polk County and that I want to kind of bring up with you, just kind of share with you. And again, it's a similar sized agreement that you have. It's a little bit different in format and very similar. What they do is that when you have a concurrency review process, the first thing they do is If a development comes in for a concurrence review process, we currently provide to the local government unit, Kissimmee, St. Cloud, or Osceola County. There's no time limit on your concurrence review process for there. Polk County puts an 18-month window on it. But if you don't use that concurrency, that capacity, in 18 months, which means you have to do road construction, have foundations built, and those kinds of things, you can lose it. Unless you donate a school site. Unless you're in a mixed-use development, PUD, we'll give you 5 years. So they've had some interesting concepts there in Polk County that I haven't seen in either Pinellas, Palm Beach, Brevard, Orange County, or yours. It's kind of an interesting concept. And they require that construction must be at a minimum a rough lot grading consistent with an approved water management district permit. So you just can't show up with a truck and start digging holes and say I'll start construction. You have to have
Can't get a permit in 18 months anyways.
a rough lot grading permit. And then the other part they talk about is
Mixed use.
if they can't do the time within 18 months, then they can do their mitigation agreement and ask for mitigation agreement for more time. That's part of what Polk County does. The other part they have here, which I find interesting, is that the mitigation in the agreement, they don't use the word dedicate or sell. They use the word donate, construct, or fund school facilities. They have a contribution of land. They don't say sell, contribution. They have provision of donation of buildings, and it's kind of interesting concepts they have here. So we're looking at it. A couple other interesting parts they have there is that in a proportionate share agreement under the Polk County item, and this is, I don't know how this is going to work out or how it works. Again, you want to find out how it really plays out, how does it work. It's good to have words written down. I mean, I know many plans of local government that they've done to do these grandiose plans that sit on a bookcase somewhere and never touched. That's primarily in like road work and redevelopment plans. Most of them are never touched. Great plans, great ideas, but never go anywhere. So the question I have here is they have something that said that if a applicant's proportionate share mitigation obligation will be credited towards the relevant school impact fee for the level or levels of schools on a dollar-for-dollar basis at fair market value. After calculation, deduction relates to the absorption. They have that provision in there. They discuss future costs, but they have something that I find interesting. If a developer's required mitigation cost is greater than the school impact fees for the development, the difference between the mitigation cost and impact fee credit is the responsibility of the developer. Really? Wow. So that's something I haven't seen. There's a couple other places I haven't seen, but we want to look into that and see what that is, just from that Frank and I have talked about it. Could it be helpful to, and I think what they have here in Polk, I have not looked how Polk is doing, but they are expanding county, maybe not as hot as Osceola. But to me, one of the goals of the Polk agreement was to force the private sector to help solve this issue before it got to the school board. That paragraph does. That would scare any developer. This paragraph here I just talked. So that may be one, but I don't know how it's worked out. I don't know if it's maybe they don't even apply it anymore because it's not workable. This strike me as initially could be unworkable. So these are kind of things you see there. And then they encourage, and so they have a series of process to encourage doing cooperation, collaboration to address the issue before it gets to the school board level. And then it has a provision in here, if after 90 days, you go through a series of process, 180 days, you go up to 18 months, you got 90-day extensions, you go some more 90 days. If the applicant and developer have not reached an agreement on an acceptable form of mitigation, and no time extensions provided or asked for, the school board notifies the county or city in writing of a lack of concurrency. And the county or city shall not issue a final development order for a proposed development. You don't have that. Orange County doesn't have that. Brevard County doesn't have that. Polk County has this. And Polk County had 12 cities and the county sign off on this. So the question is, that's a big ask for Osceola County Commissioners to look at. That's a big ask for the cities, but it's something that you have in your quiver if you want to go through and make that a point. You know, because since 2014, we have been in the most affluent development scenario market there ever has been in Florida. You've had cheap money until the last 2 years. You've had developers make huge amounts of money. My experience has been it doesn't always continue. You're already starting to see signs from development people, from information provided to people. The rate of increase has gone down, surely, and it hasn't actually gone negative yet, but it has declined. And it's election year. You know how the incumbent. I don't care what your politics are, but election year politics do affect the economy and interest rates and those kinds of things. And then the year after the election, typically that's when the covers are pulled down and, oh my God, we're in pepper shape. And so that's something to expect. So I don't know if you to expect for the next, what the foreseeable future is. You have economists that look at that and tell you that. I have some friends of mine I was having lunch with who are very smart people, a couple retired guys. And they think this real estate market is here to stay. That's what they say. And these are really smart, dependable people, and they see that. So the good thing is that you haven't had a crunch where you've had more schools but no impact fees coming in. What do you do? Because you've had a solid stream of work coming in there to fund the beast, so to speak. But what happens if you don't? What happens if the development does drop off or something happens by external events? You know, you could have external events like wars, and those kinds of things could happen. So I think you have the current agreement seems to be lacking any type of safety measure for the school district for certain types of, city or government. If there's not capacity, you can't approve this development. The question is, what is that? How is that done? And how is it done fairly and equitably? One of the great advantages you've had with the development community and this county and what this county is doing is on TV. I mean, you have kids from high school who go to Boise College for free. That comes from a robust economy. If you make schools a obstacle to an economy, then those are kinds of policy questions you and other elected officials will look at and look at in the future. Other people have done things differently than what you currently have. I just want to give you some flavor for that. We're going to look into that some more as part of our update. Now, on the concurrence review, I'm going to point out a couple other things. Frank loved this part. On the concurrence review, the city, county, or school board shall identify, encourage developers or property owners to provide incentives, including but not limited to donation of sites, negotiated sites, reservation or sale of school sites at pre-development prices, construction of new facilities or renovation to existing facilities, and provide transportation alternatives. Now,
The way it ought to be.
and the
Yeah,
thing is,
we used to get sites donated back in the day.
well, you got sites donated back in the day without roads to them and without having development ready. And what the policy question was, and is to minimize risk to the school board and minimize that was, let's get development ready sites, which would mean permits for all permits obtained, zonings have been obtained, traffic signal agreements have been retained. Let's fill the site to now we got to very specific detail on filling of the sites, what we need, the type of fill, the type of removal, the type of fill above the existing roads. And so it's ready to go to start building the foundation. Well, that's an approved site. That's not a vacant site. That's approved. That's a substantial cost in site development to get to that level. And so what is a pre-development price? They say pre-development, and I guess you're not getting it developed. So then the school board's left in a position in that case would be getting vacant land, but you still have to do some work to make sure that vacant land can be permitted. It becomes it becomes almost, it could become, I don't know which is the best alternative, but I think that it would introduce a lot of risk for the school district to have to beef up staff to examine sites and then have looking through sites, and then for every 5 sites you look at, you like one that's being offered. Versus having a capacity agreement, you give us a site that is development ready with a pond, off-site flow, and those kinds of things. That's kind of an interesting issue there I have here as well. And then the other part I have here is at the end. And this is not in your current code. There's 2 provisions in bulk. If the school board determines the adequate capacity will not be in place or under construction within 3 years of the issuance of the final subdivision or site plan approval, and mitigation is not acceptable alternative, the local government will not issue final concurrency or final development for the approval for the development. That's pretty strong language. That's not in your current agreement. And then the other part is if a proposed development does not meet school concurrency requirements and is issued a certificate of school concurrency, then the school board will place this development. So if you don't meet it and is not issued a certificate of concurrency, development is placed into a queue of pending projects for a period of 18 months. If the conditions change such that adequate capacity becomes available to serve a pending project, then the applicant will be issued a determination of adequate school concurrency capacity. So this, I don't know how this works out. I would be interested to find out, and I think that's something that we've talked about, is that if you want to beef up your agreement, find out, make sure it's a provision that has meaning, that will push the ball down the field. And that's kind of what you have. So I haven't heard of any lawsuits anywhere of a site. There is one lawsuit, demand lawsuit, where the court found that the delaying of a development due to concurrency could be a Burt-Harris Act or taking. Okay. And then there was a lower court decision that said not. So it's kind of murky. It's not really well-established law right now. There's not much cases on it. They touched on it a little bit. It was more dicta when they said that. It wasn't actually ruling that decision. It said could be. So that's kind of where you're at with concurrency. Does the current agreement need some change? Maybe, and it's up to you all to decide, but that's your current agreement.
What is the current legislation and then the recent legislation, how does that impact?
It hasn't really affected it much because, again, it just basically, I'm interested to see if the Polk County provisions that could stop development would survive the recent legislation. Okay, that's pretty strong statements, and they're the only interlocal agreement I've seen that's had that kind of a strong ability to delay development or stop it.
And I'm sure that nobody wants to go and find out that answer, right?
I don't think anyone wants that answer.
Right.
It seems to me both parties don't want that answer. Sit back, let's try to work this out. Because it usually is in the benefit of a builder developer to have schools available for the students to live there, usually. But now we have some developers who are 55 or older, the Del Webbs of the world or whatever, that expansion, the growth of that baby boomer market coming on. So that may not be the case for some regard. But you have a different impact fee for those two as well. And you deed restrict them and all that. The concepts of impact fees, the concepts of concurrency become very closely aligned. Gather your data for both the impact fee and for the concurrency. So that's kind of where you're at right now, but Frank wants us to take a look at it and if there's any suggestions.
Julie went back in.
Yeah, I do want to
Really
add.
good point about driving buying at the cost they wanted for it, pre-development.
Right.
And so what we'd like to do is take what we've seen that we at staff and Dr. Shenner think best protect the district. Then we're going to go talk to the staffs at those counties that have that, say, what issues have you had? So we can brief you all, here are the issues that existed or didn't exist, and then talk with some of the elected officials there why do you think it worked, why don't you think it works, et cetera, and bring that data back to you and have you all decide this is the policy or position you'd like to take, and we deal with the county and the two cities at that point. But you'll have the best benefit of knowing, hey, if it's working there, why can't it work here? And they're telling us it's working, and it's the same builders. If you really look at the state, they're building all over the big. So if it's working in Lake, why can't it work here? And so we've been going through that. So I think that our next step, if you're all inclined, is to let us go do that due diligence, come back to you all and say, here's the experience they're all having. And so here's Dr. Shenoff's staff's best recommendations. And if you like that or you want to tweak it, and then we go do our homework to try and get it done.
The other thing I want to add to that is I had a volunteer task force kind of do their own analysis of concurrency back in the day. And the big thing they hit is one of the differentiators between the word concurrency and capacity. Capacity is always just talking about just the physical building and the impact fee itself. Concurrency is universal. Concurrency also includes in the statute definition, which you guys have here, a level of service, right? And according to statute 163.3180, I have, I'm going to cite each one. C goes, public school level of service standards shall be included and adopted into the capital improvement element of the local comprehensive plan. So what that point is, the state statute allows us to look at level of service. And I looked at Florida rule, and school board rule level of service says the ability to deal with the operations of the school. And so by state statute and Florida rule, we're allowed to have a concurrency agreement, look at our operations. And the two main issues, because we can look at everything, but the two main issues that the SRO task force, my concurrency task force thought of were the number of teacher vacancies and the number of bus driver vacancies. And we just couldn't come to an agreement on what the exact number is. And it even says here in the statute on the next level down here, it says you're even allowed to do a tiered basis. I'm sorry, I have it written here. I'll send it to you guys later to get the actual statute. The point is, it says we're even allowed to do a tiered structure. So let's say, for instance, job vacancies are considered, like nothing is 100%. So 100% doesn't really matter because it's very rare to have 100%. But let's say the school district on our own defines 100% at 95. So let's say 95% employment is considered 100. At that point, our staff analysis doesn't even look at it. We just go, we look at it, we're at 95%, no problem. But let's say it goes below and it's like at 95 to say 85. Then at that point, we have the statutory authority to say, you know what, our operational level is impacted by say 25%. So we're gonna say, okay, you can develop your development, but not 100%. You're gonna have to go at 75% development or 50% development because the capacity issue is not just physical student stations. That's one thing I want to teach this committee. That was the whole purpose of my committee was it's not, that's why it's called concurrency, not capacity. It's not just student stations and impact fee analysis. It's the total impact to the district and do we have the infrastructure, and that infrastructure is not just physical student stations, it's operational capacity. Because we could build the Taj Mahal, but if we have no teachers, then what the heck are we teaching? We're not going to be able to meet the standards set by the Department of Education. We're going to get shut down and become a charter school in 2 seconds if we have no certified teachers.
Julie,
So,
thank you for bringing it up because that's ultimately part of what we have to bring back. And the board ultimately, with Dr. Shenoff recommending, has to say this is the level of standard because what we found out, Mark, you know this better than lawyers, for those of us who've done this a long time, every aspect of our employment is impacting instructional performance.
Right.
So if you just say it's the building, you're not paying attention to the fact you don't have anybody to teach.
And that's what the current agreement is. The current agreement, and most of the agreements are really more of the land, building, and equipment.
has
They
zero.
don't talk anything about the operational aspect and staffing.
Right.
And so that's something that we should consider and look at.
It should, and that can be some of the conversation that we have with the neighboring school districts.
And I like the idea of a range, because I don't like hard, fast numbers, because that's not fair. I don't like to say 95%, I like to say a range. Because I want to be reasonable. I want to be so steadfast that if it hits this number, they can't develop at all. You know what I'm trying to say?
Right.
Like I want to have ranges. Then if it hits below a certain range, but if we're like at 50% bus drivers, I'm sorry, we can't develop. You know what I mean? And now we have the legal basis to sit back and say, hey, we're at whatever the number is. I'm not getting married to that number, but it's the point that, at least for me, I mean, I can't speak for the rest of the board because they have to do their own analysis as well, and their opinion matters. Is for me, is bus drivers and certified teachers are the two main operational pieces that we really can't deliver effective instruction without.
Yeah, there's other operational overhead that we would need to consider,
Exceptional
mechanics, techs, those types of things, I think would be things that we would need to address because.
But that's a super high bar, right? I think that's not legally defensible saying if you don't have enough teachers that we can't develop. That would be.
Every amendment that I've seen on concurrency and all that kind of focus more on bricks and mortar
Right.
and equipment. And we'll have to take a look at this concept.
Because you can't delegate that responsibility to the developer to make sure that you have the
But again,
teachers.
No, but Tom, I
But the
think-
point is, if you don't have the staff to operate a school,
That's a district issue.
that's an issue
Well, I
that
think,
should
though,
be factored in.
Let's go back in time, in fairness to our fathers. Back when all of these were drafted, there were abundance of teachers. We could find teachers everywhere. The market has completely changed, let's face it. I think you can make a very defensible argument. We have done, as long as you've done it, we have done everything to attempt to recruit teachers, as have other counties. We're still short X. We don't have the ability to operate that school properly. And let a court say, no, you have to operate it improperly, but the last thing I want to say to the board to protect them is, yeah, go ahead and say we're going to let them do it knowing we're not going to be able to properly operate the school, because then they're going to blame you when the school doesn't perform.
But the problem is that has already been tested legally to some degree because the county hasn't been able to keep up its facilities at all. They can't operate firehouses. They can't operate emergency services.
I don't know that
but they're still
anybody's-
developing.
Nobody's really.
John, I don't know that anybody's really had the guts to test it.
Well, I've never thought of this until you just brought it up.
No, that's why I'm here.
Like, I was
That's why
I was
got elected,
approaching
brother.
bricks and
That's
mortar
why I did
equipment.
the concurrency task
Right.
force. It wasn't just me, but that's
But
the
I
whole
do
purpose.
recall years ago being a city attorney in Orlando and talking to assistant deputy city manager Brenda Robinson, and she was talking about. I said, "Man, they opened a new fire station over there by Universal." I said, "Man, that's really expensive. How to build a fire station?" She goes, "No, that's the easy part, building the fire station. The hard part is staffing it, and that's the cost."
Yeah.
And so I'd be interested to know what percentage of your budget is for personnel costs. And it's probably greater than what you spend on bricks and mortar, I would think.
Yeah.
And what it-
I don't know, $1 billion.
And what the state statute says,
Over 10 years.
and just to quote the statute, I found the statute, by the way, it's about buying time. It's not like stopping it. You just delay it. It goes, it's item D, local governments and school boards may utilize tiered level of service standards to allow time to achieve an adequate and desired level of service as circumstances warrant. So the point is, it's not stopping the development, it's saying, hey, we're not caught up yet, just like what you read and everybody complaining. As soon as we're caught up, you can fully develop. Or like you said, so the state statute physically allows it. Now, the political will is a different story. Maybe school boards never wanted to adopt it because they need to run for re-election and they need to raise a bunch of money and they never want to challenge the money that feeds their campaigns. But state statute fully allows it. We just got to have the political will to stand up and say, hey,
How are
we want
you
our community to develop.
determining fully staffed? Because, and I know it sounds like a stupid question, so I'm gonna ask you to walk me through how you're determining that we have the staff, because, let me finish. We technically don't even advertise for these positions until the school's coming online. So how are we gonna determine whether or not we have the staff or not have the staff? And I'm not saying,
We don't
I'm not-
know that answer.
right, I'm not saying that I don't agree with you. What I'm saying is, how are we going to make a case for this?
That's the work we gotta do.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could use the current job vacancies that exist now because it will carry over in the future. So if you're like fully staffed now, you can't project the future, but you could look at your current vacancies. If we have no current vacancies, then that's not a problem.
But full vacancy does not determine whether or not a business or a school district can operate. So what is the threshold?
That is the part that I want to discuss with the superintendent. I trust the superintendent to a certain degree. I mean, the superintendent can tell me, hey, this is a pain point. We're hiring too many substitutes, and it's,
Harry,
substitutes aren't the same.
You asked the most salient question on that, and really, that's gonna come down to the superintendent feeling, here's a number I can defend instructionally if I'm put on the stand.
Okay.
But you're gonna have to make a declaration, right, a formal
Yeah.
declaration that this school is now unfunctional,
You
right,
know,
or is.
We're
or
hearing
the
this
inability to
issue, don't
facilitate.
think we're alone. You had a sheriff in here talking about not being able to hire deputies, so let's put them out of schools. I mean, at some point, the government, meaning the county and the cities, are gonna have to realize there is a huge price tag coming with unchecked,
Development.
and things have got to be dealt with.
Right.
Or the citizens are really gonna suffer, and so what I'm working with Tom on is that we're gonna explore everything out there so we can say to you, X is working and nobody's complaining in that county. So,
Because the thing is, you could use district-wide numbers, in other words. You don't have to prove it that that specific school that doesn't even exist is gonna have vacancies. If we have vacancies district-wide, that's what you do. That's the same thing that we do for the impact fees. We don't look at impact fees and say, you know what, St. Cloud is more expensive than Celebration, or the other way around. Celebration is more expensive, we're gonna charge a different impact fee for Celebration. No, they use the aggregate of all the school construction costs that we've had in the last 4 years, and they use that data to move forward, and that's how we justify the construction of a new school, regardless of where it's situated in our county. So we can use the same thing with our job vacancies. We can say, hey, we're just short. Now, if we're not short any bus drivers, it doesn't matter where you're at because you're not short. So whenever you build a new one, you don't have empirical data to justify holding a future development back because you're at full capacity. But if we're already at 80% capacity, regardless of what school, it has to be district-wide numbers. If you're at 80% capacity, that means you're 20% short. So you're probably gonna carry that 20% shortage into the new one that's coming in. If not, it's gonna get exacerbated because now you have to cover the 20% plus add in the new capacity. So that's how it's like. So I can understand your little bit distinction is that it's not justifying what the future school can have. You look at what you currently have as a district-wide and where those shortages are.
Sure, and that's fine, but I think one can make the argument, not us, obviously, but whomever we're defending this against, that we are operating, regardless of whether or not we have that 20% or whatever that, the delta is. So.
But see, that's the big, but that's also,
an
that's also.
argument that needs to really be fully fleshed out.
But also, don't forget too, though, that's the basis of having a concurrency agreement. If we have an interlocal agreement, we're establishing what those standards are. So they
Sure.
don't always have to be justifiable 100%. If we don't even have an interlocal agreement, then you can't defend it in court. But the whole purpose of having an interlocal agreement is the counties and the cities agreed that this is what we want. It's almost aspirational in nature. It doesn't have to be fully justifiable. We just have to, as a school board, say with the county, hey, look, we want 80% employment of teachers. If it drops below 80, we don't think that's proper for us. So it doesn't have to be it's not like the death penalty where proven beyond a reasonable doubt and you have to have like so much things. The interlocal agreement is the legal document as the basis for development. When they go into court, they say, hey, here's the interlocal agreement. Now they have to justify why they voted against the interlocal agreement. That's the purpose of having an interlocal agreement.
I've gotta go back and listen to what you said, jot down both sets of notes. I need to go back and think, get in a little dark room and think for a little bit. Because I did impact fees in law school for Professor Jurgensmeyer and drafted the ordinances and all that back in the day. And impact fees generally are only used for capital items, not operational. So I need to go that way, and then so if that's the case, then that's the case.
And I'm not trying to generate revenue. I'm not trying to generate revenue from it. Just to let you know, I'm not trying to increase the impact fee
Well, you
to
beat
pay
me
for
to
bus
my-
drivers.
You beat me to it, so I'll look at that from that concept, but I haven't seen anything
I don't
about
get misinterpreted.
concurrency level of service based upon operational issues. And that's what I'm really gonna look at, and I understand what your concerns are, what you're raising.
and if we conclude, guys, that, look at this is too much of a risk, then we literally need to turn it over to FSBA to say, you need to get the legislature to do something for this, just like you did for law enforcement, about you could have guardians, et cetera, because it's the biggest area I'm concerned about, we talked about in the past year, is finding certified exceptional ed teachers. I mean, that's just a major issue.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, if I'm hearing everything correctly, the next steps would be for staff to take what's currently there and then take what is currently out there from, say, other agreements, other places that Mr. Cowan has referred to. Be able to do some research on some of those more advantageous conditions that are of interest to us. Be able to vet those out with staff to determine how well those have been operationalized and used, then come back to the board with some suggestions about how to potentially craft and move forward, and have those discussions with our municipal partners.
Once our board says that's the direction we
Right,
need to go.
right, exactly. So yes, we would need to get that consensus from this board, and then we would be able to then move forward with engaging our municipal partners in more in deeper discussions about how those things would be operationalized. We'll have the anecdotal information from other counties to be able to go ahead and bring back here to be able to talk through the advantages, disadvantages, pain points around certain things that certainly sound good within their agreement, but quite honestly maybe haven't actualized at the level that maybe they're written to.
Remember, Lake's primary builder is the villages, and they pretty
That's
much
Sumter County.
Sumter meant, but they're
It's a
going
big
into Lake now. by the
That
way.
was Lake.
No, they bought land all the way across into
They're
Lake.
huge. Yeah, they're
And
probably-
They're
so-
starting to expand across.
I think, Tommy, one of the components with, we're gonna need to sit with the development community at some point, bring them in when we have ours crystallized, so we know what is our local community
For
gonna
sure.
say about it, so you're aware of, here's what our local people are saying.
Right.
One thing that you might want to add to the argument is, because clearly we're operating schools,
Yes.
is the impact of not having certified teachers on quality of
Yeah.
education versus whether or not we're able to do it, which I'm sure you were gonna include anyway. But I think that's really more of the argument perhaps that even Mr. Melendez was making. Clearly we can still open schools, but we're not performing at the best level possible.
Right.
If we had all of the different elements required.
And we'll draw on some other experiences like this, like fire stations.
Yeah.
They have that 6-minute requirement, response time and all of those. What happens if they don't have it? For instance, what happens if they are well over it? Does the government not approve development until they have a new fire station site funded, ready to go? I mean, that's how it used to be back in the 60s and 70s.
You're not gonna get ISO certified, which brings down the insurance rates for the local community, when you don't meet those levels.
Yeah, so we'll look at those items as well, other parallels that exist out there. When do you want us, Mr. Superintendent, when do you want us to come back, tomorrow or?
Yeah.
It's Mr.
Yeah,
Cowan.
to the end of the
I was-
day.
I was gonna say that.
End of day.
We have an hour and a half between now and the board meeting, so we better get moving. So
You never asked that question in a meeting.
So I actually would like to hear from the board. When would you like us to come back? I think it's gonna take us
A good 3 months at minimum, I think, to get some data here to collect it and looked at it. Because ideally what I'd like to do is get some people who are land development people, not developers, but people who do permitting for land development. And I know a couple would be effective to help gather some data. Go talk to them versus a lawyer talk to them, or versus government official talk to them. Just have a different type of perspective go in there, collect some data. And it could take about 2 or 3 rounds of going back to the same source, asking information before we feel comfortable giving that information.
So board members, are you comfortable with coming back in July, and we'll work with Tanya to go ahead and create another workshop in July? Okay,
It would have to be before July 15th.
okay. Mr. Cowan has spoken before July 15th.
Why are you going to Europe?
Yes.
Oh, where are you going? Okay, we'll talk later.
Golfing trip in
Offline.
Ireland with the
Offline.
guys for about 21 days. So.
21 days,
Well,
wow,
yeah, one
wow.
for each hole. That's how long it'll take for each of you to.
No, I'm
plan.
gonna also take some time off and see my dad's dad, camp on and some stuff like that. Family keep.
I know, we're gonna do that.
Dr.
This
Shannon,
trip's been planned for 2 years.
our July meeting is on the 16th, and we have nothing scheduled prior to the 5:30, so it's.
There you go.
I don't think we can do the
That's the only
16th.
day is the.
Then we may need to be back in,
No, we can do the 16th.
we can do the 16th?
Yes.
You've suddenly changed your
No, you
plans.
said before the 17th, right?
No,
I thought you said the 15th.
I put down 15th, but I'm actually leaving town on the 20th.
He wanted 5 days to
This
get.
guy.
Talk about some extra hours.
This-
5 days to pack.
He needs a
The
week to
16th
pack
it
his
is, thank you,
gloves.
Tanya.
I mean, 21 days,
Time would
I
be
get
like
it. I
What's
get
that?
it.
What else is he hiding from us?
Let's do, is 3:30 amenable for the board?
Yes, that's fine.
4,
Yes.
Oh, it's fine, it's fine.
3:30?
Tom, after the meeting, we're gonna have to discuss some commitments you said I had to make based upon your schedule.
Gosh, that's a whole different conversation.
To me?
No, to
Oh,
him.
to Tom? Okay. You should yell at Tom. All right, are there any more questions for Mr. Callen before he go finds tea to rest his voice? Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
See
Mr.
all
Allen.
again.
Allen. We are on to the naming procedures for new schools.
Alrighty. So board members, you have a packet in front of you where I have collected the current state statute related to this topic, as well as our current policy, and then the selected school districts' policies that are of the same area. So the main thing to know is that in statute 1001.43, it simply states that school boards have the authority in regards to dedication and rededication, or naming or renaming of district buildings and other district facilities. And from that statute comes your policy. And that is policy 8.54, which was put into place, let me double check there, the history, in 2005. Okay, indeed, I was right. I was second guessing. So in that policy, you can see that there are specific priorities that were in there related to how to name the schools. Specifically trying to limit risk. I'll just go right for the jugular. That's why they wrote the policy the way they did. Because at the time that it was written, there was concern about naming a facility or school site after someone who might have been involved in a crime or other controversy. So the thought was at the time that dead men tell no tales, or women, and that if the person is not living, that limits your risk. So there's that. And the safest of all is geography, for the most part, we would think, naming it after geographic features or streets or such. The problem can come into play where you have now, and it is not addressed in your policy, a community development district such as Celebration, or an education finance benefits district such as Bella Lago. And we have schools named after each. So you have that flexibility, even within your current policy. The world is your oyster, and you can make this policy whatever you would like to change. But I'm highlighting what I did as the potential risks, just so you have that out there from the get-go and understand what was the driver behind this policy at the time it was passed several decades ago. And yeah, I was here when it happened. In the policy, I'll add two other things. It does address individual buildings, etc., in paragraph 3. And in paragraph 4, plaques, which actually can become quite political if you are in the process of renovating a school and there's a plaque on a building like a media center, and that person's relatives are still here and they have passed away. And so what typically happens in our district is that plaque is moved inside the new wing if you will, or building that replaces it. Case in point, Central Avenue Elementary School, their media center had a plaque on it, and it was actually torn down to build what exists there today. So they moved that plaque inside, and if you go in the Central Hall, if it's still in the same place, it's in there right when you go in, the entrance in the main, where the, I say roads, but it's hallways, cross the intersection. So I am here today mainly to take your feedback on any changes you would like to see added to this policy or revised, or if you have different direction, and I am open to that now.
I think it's funny how Brevard County has policy E, the name of a new school once adopted shall be considered permanent for a period of no less than 5 years.
There's a story
my.
there.
Year 6, if
I need to know what that story
is.
is. You don't have to tell me now, but
Honestly, I don't know the story, but I see policy language like that, I know there's a story.
I'll find out.
But technically, Orange County recently renamed the school to Roberto Clemente.
That's true.
So
they did.
it's not unprecedented for a school to change names for some compelling reason. So
And yes, sir. And then there's the politics of, for example, in my own case, I graduated from Robert E. Lee High School, and they're now renaming my former high school to after an African American physician whose name escapes me at the moment. But that happens too. And in our state, I think the last time that was in the news was in Jacksonville.
That's exactly the same case.
but if
with
it's
Roberto
but if
Clemente
it's silent
Jackson.
though, we're not even addressing it. So technically we can change the name at any time because if
Yes,
it
sir.
doesn't say it,
Correct.
then it doesn't exclude you from. So is it better off just being silent and just, I guess the board shouldn't capriciously change the name of a school. You know what I mean? Or do you want to put rules behind how we change the name of the school? I mean, I have no appetite for changing the name of the school, just
Yeah,
to let you know right now.
I don't either.
So, the only reason why we're bringing this back is because it was a request from the board to bring this back. And if there's no appetite for any change whatsoever in our policy, then that's fine too. It's just, I was trying to oblige the request that came to bring this back for a workshop, that's all.
The only thing I would recommend, like I say if the board had no appetite to change anything,
Yeah.
the only thing I would recommend is if we can phase it out and say, hey, prior to a school opening, by 6 months, the committee should have conducted business, kind of putting a timeline, so that way we know when to trigger the process and when to complete the process. That's the only thing I would request the
So
board.
if you don't mind, Dr. Shanoff, that was our challenge, I think, this year. Because by the time the attendance boundaries are established, which is usually around November or December, we try to do it in November. Then we select the principal around December, then that process starts. And the challenge, we're working through it, but typically trying to get the logo or the colors picked so that you can do the gym floor or at least get the accents done right. That's usually trying to marry those two, or even if it's like a media center, trying to get the right color carpet or something like that to match it. Then
So what's the time frame?
Ideally for us a little bit earlier than November, but I know that that's a challenge.
Well, I mean, I think that if we're limited by when we complete the rezoning, number one, is there a reason why we can't do the rezoning earlier?
So in the normal world, what we do is the principals pick their committees the first week of school because they need to meet with their SACs. And then we have the meetings in September and October, and we advertise them minimum 21 days. So typically our first meeting cannot occur before November, but the board has a tendency to only have the one meeting in November, and I believe you had something with the board up at capacity. So we usually move the meeting to the first meeting in December. So we typically don't zone in the summer because school's out of session, so the earliest we can start is.
It's the principal,
May I make a recommendation?
Absolutely.
When I assume that the interested parties involved in rezoning would be those that are going to be affected by the school, correct? Is there any reason why we can't go ahead and pull that group together during the rezoning process and and get the list of interested parties to the board, so then the board can vet those folks relative to who they would like on the naming committee, and maybe get that naming done, maybe consistent with the rezoning being done as well.
Because when we start the school year, the plans are pretty much tentatively that we take into the community, so
Okay.
we know before September.
Yeah,
It's
who
just
those
we don't
are.
have our first meeting until September.
That
So
would,
we usually know by late July, early August what a tentative plan is and who the target areas are.
I just think that we would want to wait until after that first meeting that you have, and then potentially bring that list of interested parties back to the board members, maybe, and then they have a menu by which they can go ahead and call and determine who they want to serve.
the same process as this year, provide the list of affected parents that are.
No, but if we, no, because they're not affected fully until we ratify
That's correct.
the new zones.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that if we already have folks that already know that they're going to be impacted by this,
Vested interest.
they have a vested interest already, they've expressed an interest, and bring those, so maybe it's 15 names, right? Bring them to the board and let the board decide at that point who then moves forward. Or the board can choose whoever they'd like.
You're saying that there are areas identified at that point in time, so we should be able to figure out if we're selecting 2 members each from that general location to start the process at that point. So I think it is more or less just shoring up the process of how we.
Just getting those names to you earlier, you make your selection within a defined period of time, and then bring those back. Potentially, could we bring them back? When do we finalize the zoning? December?
Yes.
Our hope is no later than December.
Okay, so then at the December meeting, we could go ahead and approve the zoning and approve the name potentially.
If
And
that,
then, I think part of it too is there was just some discussion around the process itself of
Yes.
how it went. So just, I don't know if because we don't have it in here, it's not within policy, so if there's a way to create the process for which that will be done.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, because I do
think
like the
definitely-
fact that, I'm
Great
sorry,
suggestion.
when, kinda like what Mr. Aguirre said during his point in comments, was to have at least 2 meetings. One of them, the committee just kind of gets together, let them know that their sunshine applies to you, and here are some potential names. Feel free to come back to the next one to come up with your own name, because we don't want them to feel like they're being limited to only, hey, these are only 3 names you can think of. Because
Right.
what if that inspired them to come up with something else? And they still have to get a unanimous, approval
Right.
at the next one. But I do feel that you're right. The language should at least say that there should be a minimum of 2 committee meetings. One of them to introduce the concept, let them know what's going on, let them go home for like a week or 2 at least, or at least a week, mull over their options, and then reconvene, and then have a final vote.
That sounds good. I like that. I just because I just want to think a little bit ahead. When we look at AAA will have a planning principle in place 12 months out, but your zoning won't be done until
So if it opens in August 2026,
Yes.
our redistricting should be finished in December 2025.
okay.
6
So
months.
just shy of 12 months.
So still, it's still the same timeline. Okay. Is that going to be enough time for you?
I think if we can get it in December, I think because it got delayed a little bit this year, it kind of put us on the back foot a little bit, and so we're having to react to it.
So you think 6 months will be
Yeah,
enough for high
I
school?
think, and that way we can set it. Yeah, I mean, we're working out. Most of what we're doing is generic. The accents can be added,
Okay.
and it's stuff like the logo and the floor and that sort of stuff on the gym.
So Dr. Shannon, because there is like a 30-day advertising period, we pretty much have our key stakeholders known and finished by October. Because we're advertising the month of October to have the public hearing in November.
Yeah, I want to be sure though that we're as transparent as possible. We try to engage as many people as possible in this process, and I have a feeling that if we started earlier, we may end up being able to engage more stakeholders in this process.
Is there a way to put within the process, because I know you said there was a survey that had been done, but like putting into the process that a survey will be conducted in order to give time, like so feedback that comes from the entire community to those members
To
that are
those members.
selected, so
That's
that
a-
they can review as well and take
We can
those
do
into
that.
consideration.
That's a great idea. Yes, absolutely.
Well, any
So-
input that we get, John has to.
John's going to draft into new policy language. So all of this is going to be included.
So you were hearing this, right? I don't know if I'm
Yep,
repeating.
I took notes.
No, the only thing is, to Mr. Arroyo's point, again, during the whole conversation, because I never really looked at it to this level of detail, and it's up to the rest of the board, since we're possibly looking at this, do we have a desire to look into the logo, into the colors, or we just want to name it and just let the principal at that point, which, I'm okay with either one, I'm just saying, since we're opening up Pandora's box, let's look at every corner and say, do we want to tell them what the logo is and what the colors are, or do you want to just keep it as is
The
and let the
mascot?
principal? Yeah, like the mascot, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, like the mascot, the logo.
The mascot and
I really
colors.
think, I like that the principal can come in there as part of their, procedures in opening up a new school to be able to do that on their own.
Okay.
I think that's a really good,
I just think that we might be clear on that, and just since it's a policy, there's no misunderstanding,
Oh,
that
yeah.
once the board
We can
approves of
definitely
it,
Wanna write it
codify
that
into
it's
that.
the
yeah,
principal
you wanna
that
clarify that.
chooses, just so no
Got it.
uncertainty, because another board may not be as nice as we are for some reason. you
Yeah,
know?
John, are you good with putting that part in as well?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
I'm just trying to, if we're gonna do something right completely and make it
That's it,
clear,
exactly.
there's no fighting in the future, because we love you, Dr.
We don't
Shanoff,
want
but,
to,
you know.
thank you.
I
We
just
don't
don't
want
wanna
to, we don't
repeat-
want to go to 8.54. We don't want to bring back 8.54 for another workshop. All right, good deal.
So, and just to make that clear, the logo, the mascot logo,
So
whatever.
for
colors,
three, the individual buildings, additions and all that, I don't know that I'm comfortable with the principal deciding the names of the buildings and stuff because those are temporary positions, right? That really should be, that's a community kind of thing. So it's not every
It
day
says
that a
approval
principal
by
will
the
stay.
superintendent though, as a caveat.
So, so we can amend this a couple different ways. So we can leave it as is because that would be subject to approval. We could ask for approval of the school's SAC before it comes to me as an additional layer. So the principal could make the recommendation to the school's SAC. The SAC could approve that, and then it goes to the superintendent. At that point, I would have a conversation with the affected board member, and then we would flush out any concerns at that point, unless the preference of the board is to bring any sort of names to the entire board for consideration.
Now, one thing, and that's one thing, but another thing I think of this as like naming rights. And most naming rights, when you look at it from the college perspective, somebody's forking over some money to do that. I mean, there's like a donation, a contribution. I don't like the idea of just naming a building and not getting some kind of contribution from that.
Well, I think it's happened in instances too where, we had out at, where was it, Harmony? Was it Harmony or St. Cloud where the
celebration too.
when someone's passed away? There's been something done.
Oh, yeah.
I think
Well, we could put that in as a consideration.
what you can do is, I think that you could add an additional item in here, an additional Roman numeral that says, businesses or enterprise that are interested in naming rights must be approved by the school board.
But they have to pay something, like you said, I can see the
Correct.
football
We will-
stadium,
we
I
will
can see
then-
the track, I
We
can see
will
the
then
gym.
go through we will then go through a contract process because there's going to be a length of period of time.
Limited.
And there's going to be certain requirements, I'm sure, about where their logo is located.
Right.
How many logos do they get to put up?
Yeah.
Does that mean that they get any access
And is
after
it
hours?
expired? I mean, look at UCF, it was
Sure,
Bright
it's
House
gonna be-
Stadium for a while,
It
then
would
somebody
be
else sponsored
correct.
it.
So it's length of term. So I think that what we can do is, I would say that when you talk about naming rights for businesses or enterprise that want to purchase, at that point, we would need to enter into a contract.
Yeah.
That contract would be subject to approval by the school board. We would then be able to provide the school board with schematics, so then they would be 100% aware of what it would look like once completed. Because the last thing that anybody needs is, everybody's getting an Advent health tattoo, I mean.
I think that all the individual buildings should be a school board thing because those are public buildings. So those decisions should be made by the public. It should not be made by the principal. That's a public decision.
Okay.
If you're gonna put your name on this public, it's gotta be a public decision.
How
What
would
you
you
could do
guys,
is, what you could do is, I like to say recommended by the principal and, or recommended by the superintendent or the principal, whatever recommended.
I can bring those,
Anyone could recommend. I mean, anybody
Yeah,
can
anybody
ask
can
for.
I can bring those, sure, anybody can recommend. I could bring those to the board for approval and it could be a standing agenda item.
Yeah.
Or, it doesn't come through very often. So, but when it does, we can go ahead and take it through and do it all at one time in a cycle and just say that if there are any schools that are interested in renaming anything after anybody, we would need that information and we'll create a standard process for that and we would bring them all at one time. Does that work?
Yeah, and then the last thing, just to beat it to death, because I like to do that, just to think of all the potential possibilities. Like if we do the naming rights, the monies that collected, does it go to that school 100%? Or does it go like 80% to that school, 20% to the district kitty for all purposes?
So we would definitely go ahead and work with the board on something consistent with, say, maybe the sharing of funds that we have via Facilitron, and keeping it consistent with that. Or if the board wants to choose to go in a different direction, we can certainly do that as well.
I mean, normally that's left to the negotiation table between the person who's buying the naming rights.
So not necessarily because they're gonna fork over the amount of money no matter
No
what.
matter what.
So it really is up to the district to determine how much
But
of
if
that.
it was someone who died and they left they bequeathed $1 million to Harmony.
Oh,
then-
to name the
Right.
stadium after themselves, and it's $1 million for Harmony after expenses, but we would have to keep some for maintenance.
For administration, maintenance, or whatever.
We would have to keep some.
There's actually a case law out of LA, Beverly Hills, that talks about equity. And like when Winter Park, they wanted to give computers to all the kids. We were like, because Winter Park will have all the computers and Jones and so there's a component there where you do have to think about some way everybody kind of benefiting from it.
Okay.
I was thinking about that too, in the sense that we have areas that they're going to take preference over
The point is to
others,
look
so.
I used to tell principals, if you want to know about a donation, don't ask me, just get what you need for your school. and
I'll tell you
get
what,
out of it, because-
what we'll do is we'll do the research from surrounding districts and we'll curate all that together and I'll bring it back and share it with you individually and we can kind of figure out how to go from there. Does that work?
All right, any further discussion at this
Would
time?
you like that, before you guys leave, would you like that to be considered as part of this policy or do you
Yeah,
want to
because
move
it's part of the
forward with-
naming rights.
Yeah,
and
I
then
think
so.
like it's-
Okay, alright.
We can expand upon 3.
All right, so
When naming
it'll
rights-
take me a minute to
Yeah.
collect some of that from other districts. So, okay,
This workshop is adjourned.
all right, thank you. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's B14.
And by the way,
That's a management directive.
It is a
It's not
management
board
directive,
policy.
but that's where it's laid out, because the board